But I'll keep
Sure.
talking.
I'll just roll. Cool.
The what was I gonna lead to? Oh, the other element of the radicalness here was that as America entered World War I in 1917, the Irish in Butte did not want to go into that on the side of Great Britain.
Right.
That was who they were fighting over there.
The Irish were neutral, right?
Butte was truly a microcosm of Europe. By most estimates, we had at least 30 different nationalities and ethnic groups. And in the 1920 census, a third of the population, a third of a large number, was actually foreign-born. Not foreign ancestry, they were the first generation. So they called Butte a melting pot, but there's not that much melting, not until the 1940s, because in the teens and 20s, it was Europe. And besides the World War I, we had the Irish Rebellion, the Russian Revolution. All of this gets reflected in Butte one way or the other.
Now, in that period, however, I can't quite remember the dates, but it ran something like, right around 1917, you had the first Red Scare and the Palmer raids, and basically Big Bill jumping bail to the Soviet Republic, and a lot of these foreign-born radicals being deported. So how did that affect Butte and the community here? Oh, let me just get a shot.
I would say that the heart of that issue really comes down to the labor movement. And the labor movement was focused on the IWW, the Industrial Workers of the World, the most radical of all of the labor organizations.
Right.
Butte was always incredibly labor organized, almost too organized for our own good. We'll talk about that when we get a block down the street here. But basically the IWW being, if this is socialism, this is communism, here's the IWW. Pretty close over there anyway.
Anarcho-communists.
Advocating the complete overthrow of the capitalist system.
Abolition of the wage system is our watchword.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And then
contracts.
And the second thing about it was
fucking nuts.
They opposed the war.
Yeah.
So it was a combination of the general attitudes about labor and what they wanted and the war.
Right.
So the anti-war attitude on the part of the IWW came into a state that was hyper-patriotic.
Right.
The Sedition Act
hypercapitalist
that was passed in Montana was extremely onerous. People were arrested and thrown in jail for saying things like, that war is a joke. Say that. I mean, that's all they said.
Right.
And they're in jail.
Right.
It was
like joking about Stalin sort of level almost.
It was. It really was.
Yeah.
And these things got overturned later, although it's as recently as just 2006 is when the 79 people who were arrested back in that era were finally officially pardoned.
Wow, nice.
So it was quite the hotbed, and being against the company, the Anaconda company, was the same thing as being pro-Germany, is what it amounted to. So anybody who spoke against the company, even if it was for standard labor rights and so on, didn't matter. Same problem, same issues.
Yeah, right.
Let's cross the street and go a half a block up here.
Wow. Yeah, thanks. That's fascinating. Yeah, I parenthetically, I take interest in the whole libertarian, side of things these days too. And a big thing is like the Second Amendment, right of workers or people to be armed. And so I looked up some of your laws regarding that, and they're even worse than Chicago when it comes to knives, actually. Yeah, it's.
Well, and Butte is truly an anachronism within Montana. There's so many nicknames. One of my favorite ones is, Butte, just 5 miles from Montana. Politically, that's pretty true. But it's even complicated politically. Butte and Anaconda in 2004 were the only counties in Montana that voted for Al Gore.
Right.
The entire rest of the state voted for George Bush. Well,
I read that, yeah.
In 2008, the Obama election, the first Obama election, it's like 78% for Obama.
Wow.
Now, it's complicated because a lot of that is the blue-collar labor movement that really always has leaned left and voted Democratic.
Right.
It's complicated by the Irish Catholics. So I say this with a certain amount of tongue-in-cheek, but to me, we have a lot of anti-abortion Democrats in Butte.
Oh, okay.
And that makes it complicated, depending on how strongly you feel about any particular issue.
Really?
So it's a fascinating and complicated place in many ways.
Interesting, yeah.
This is the memorial to the Miners Union Hall that stood right here. It was blown up in 1914.
Really?
It was, you might think it was company versus union, but it wasn't really. Strictly speaking, it was union versus union.
Progressive Miners of America, or?
Right, the IWW, the Industrial Workers of the World, they were the ringleaders on the radical side.
Okay.
The conservative side was, I think, officially the whole union was the Western Federation of Miners, the WFM, but it had all these little sub-cliques and so on within it. And so the conservative side was essentially afraid of the company and was practically a mouthpiece for the company. The radical side wanted all kinds of changes.
What year was this again?
1914.
14, okay.
Yeah, June of 1914. This touched off 6 years of incredible labor unrest that we'll talk about in our block-and-a-half walk around here.
Great.
In 1914, the miner's wage was $3.50 a day, which was actually pretty good for hard labor, although, of course, it was dangerous, too. But it had been $3.50 a day since 1878.
Wow.
Nobody got a raise for more than a generation.
Wow.
So that was just one of the grievances. So they blew up the Union Hall, and in fact, they blew up the Union.
Who did?
The Union people did.
The left wing or the right wing? Yeah.
There's a really good question. I don't think anybody really knows specifically who went up the hill to the Stewart mine and brought the dynamite back down here to blow it up. It really hardly matters. The two sides were such poles apart that either side could have done it. But after this,
like the Korean War. Who started the Korean War?
Exactly. Yes.
Yeah.
So after this, we had two miners' unions, and the whole point of a union is solidarity.
Right.
So when you got two unions, the company starts to use what I call the divide and conquer approach to things.
Right.
We'll talk to these guys, but not those guys, and eventually everybody's going to cave in. And that's what was happening. We'll get to 1917 just around the corner up here.
Okay.
But this is what started it. This in 1914 touched off what probably was already pretty much a powder keg of tension. But it was this that really started things into an incredible turmoil.
Okay, great, thanks. Coming up on Copper Street.
Yep.
I'll note.
And we passed it earlier back there, but just a block and a half down from the Union headquarters here, the big brick building there on the left, that is
Let me zoom in.
That's the Hennessy building, and that was the company headquarters, Anaconda company headquarters.
Oh, okay.
From 1901 to 1977.
I'm sorry, which one?
The big brick one right there to the left.
Oh, okay, just right on the corner there. Okay.
The lower floors for decades were the Hennessy department store, the largest in Montana, but the upper floors is where the company had its offices. So just a block and away from Union headquarters here.
Great. Everything nice and cozy.
Yep.
Man. Note the banner. Welcome to historic Butte. Zoom in on that. Okay, and we got Copper Street for the metal, not the forces of state repression.
Right. Although depending on how you look at it, it could be taken either way.
Right.
We're crossing Main Street here. We're just going to go down here to Wyoming. We're going 3 years into the future, from 1914 up to 1917.
Huh. Interesting. There he is.
I could point out too that everywhere you see a vacant lot, a parking lot, new buildings like these, it means we've lost buildings. There were no open spaces everywhere with solid buildings to accommodate most of those 100,000 people up here on the hill, because the mines were right up here. You'll see one as soon as we get around just a little further along here, the Stewart mine right there. So just above the neighborhoods, the juxtaposition of the mining operations with the neighborhoods is truly a hallmark of Butte.
Interesting. So Stewart Mines, so a Scot owned the mine?
I don't truly know his ancestry. I wouldn't argue with Scottish.
I was reading about the Molly Maguires where often it was an Anglo owner and a Scottish foreman and an Irish miner. And so that touched off a lot of the class struggle intertwined with the national struggle, and given the Irish history of lawlessness back home, the preferred method of settling disputes with the Scots, the Scotch, Irish, English oppressors was, with a gun or a bomb. So, yeah.
Well, I can believe that. Here in Butte, the two primary copper kings, Marcus Daly and William Clark, they both were Irish ancestry.
Interesting.
Marcus Daly was actually born in Ireland. William Clark was born in Pennsylvania, but he was also of Irish ancestry. So it was really the struggle that's called the War of the Copper Kings was really fundamentally much more of a business struggle. Now, that's not to say that there weren't tensions and strife on ethnic basis all over town all the time.
Right.
But I think I would probably say that down in the mines, ethnic issues were relatively suspended. Down in the mines, a miner's a miner.
Right.
Now, that doesn't mean you like this guy because he's Irish or because he's Finnish or whatever, but you tolerate it down in the mines.
Right.
Above ground, it's a whole other world, and Butte's neighborhoods are more or less ethnic enclaves, but don't visualize something with sharp boundaries.
Right.
I know Finns who lived right here in Corktown. This is Corktown here behind us. And Dublin Gulch was over there. So this is the heart of the Irish community.
Sure.
But there were so many Irish in Butte, they were everywhere,
right.
literally.
I see.
Finntown's down that way, but Finnish people lived up here too.
So beautiful
there
view.
was a mixture.
Wow.
And when you read the list of people who lived in Meaderville, which we say was mostly Italian, it's out where the Berkeley Pit is today, it's everybody. It's Tomasoviches, it's Obradoviches, it's good Irish names, O'Malley, it's anything you want. Mostly Italian, but nothing in Butte was exclusively anything.
I think that was probably also maybe a product of the times, but also a product of the fact that this is a mountain mining town, and from what I've seen in history, miners tend to be so much more class aware, maybe class conscious than, say, Chicago,
yeah,
where
I would say actually that I say this a lot, and I'd say it without knowing for sure, but I think that class distinction was actually, again, trumped nationality in many cases.
Right.
The west side, which is the upscale part of town, the east side, which was a complicated lower end part of town, they both had many different ethnicities. On the west side, which is upscale, you'll find a mansion right next to a little miner's cottage next door to a boarding house.
The
so
frontier,
there's this pretty incredible juxtaposition on the streetscape, at least, of classes. Now, I don't think that means that the guy who owned this mansion liked that relatively poor person who had that miner's cottage next door.
Sure.
But
same with Manhattan. I mean, they don't really love the poor people who live a block away.
right. So again,
Right.
it was a toleration kind of a thing. And on the west side, at least, those miners in those little houses, they're trying. They've got a family. They're coming up in the world. The east side had the heart of our slum district, actually, our shanty town called the Cabbage Patch.
Shanty
So-
Irish, yeah.
Yeah. So everything was everywhere.
I see. So there were more lace curtain Irish on this end and more shanty Irish on that end? or-
Absolutely, yes.
Okay.
Yeah, so that's
Interesting.
a fair distinction. But beyond that one fundamental
Right.
difference, it's just all mixed together.
Interesting. Yeah. Okay.
I actually stopped here because I want to say a word about this little blue house across here from us.
Uh-huh.
This was the home of a man named Larry Dugan. It was built in 1910, and he became the sheriff of Silver Bow County. But he actually was better known as the Undertaker. In fact, he was so well known as the Undertaker, the miners gave his name to the big rocks in the mine tunnel ceilings. They called those big rocks Dugans. Because if one of them fell on you, you were going to the Dugan mortuary. And he has a role to play in 1918 in this labor story that we're putting together here.
When you say he was known as the Undertaker, does that mean that I take it to mean he didn't have a second job as an Undertaker, or did he?
He didn't really. He was fundamentally the Undertaker. I think when he was the sheriff, he continued to be the Undertaker.
Oh, okay. So he had two jobs. He was the Undertaker also.
Yeah, most
okay.
of the elected people in those days, they didn't get paid remotely enough to survive on, so they had to have another job.
I see. Interesting. with like Matewan in West Virginia, the sheriff there, I actually have a coworker, shout out to Fred White, whose grandfather, I think, was the Sheriff Hatfield, Sid Hatfield of Matewan and Mingo County. Was this guy like Sid Hatfield? Was he a good guy in terms of defending the miners, or well, this was a company, more of a company town?
There's
so.
a really good question, and I'm not going to pretend that I truly know. My back of my head feeling about Larry Dugan is that he was a good guy. He certainly became a sympathizer with the IWW, the Industrial Workers of the World, and that's the role that he's going to play in 1918.
Really? Wow.
So I don't think he wasn't the sheriff at that point in time. He was just the undertaker, but he owned a building that we'll talk about where a raid occurred.
Okay.
So I guess I would say he was on the side of the working class people.
Interesting.
More than otherwise.
Oh, thanks. Wow, okay.
That there is actually his original hearse barn, that brown building there.
I see. Nice. Let me take my glove off and zoom in. All right, okay. Just gotta put the cord on. It's getting warmer. Take my glove off.
Yeah, yesterday I had to do a walkabout with these Italians from Buenos Aires, and it was about 18 degrees. And it was
they were freaking out,
I was too, a little bit.
Really?
When I get going and talking, as long as my hands aren't freezing too much, then I'm okay.
Sure.
So we're here to Copper and Wyoming Street. Just go down a half a block here. The important buildings that we're going to talk about are gone. They were in this parking lot over here to the left. But this street here saw some amazing action. The Finns, as you probably know, the Finns were some of the most socialistic elements of Europe in those days. So they brought some of the most left-leaning attitudes with them. But again, in the mines, you wanted a Finn to build your mine shaft because they were known as outstanding woodworkers. So again, I'm saying, I think, and I don't know this absolutely, but I think that some of the prejudice and strife was suspended when you're down inside the mines. There, it's a matter of respect for what you do, actually. Above ground, it's a whole other world. The Finlander Hall stood right here, right about where that silver, whatever that color vehicle is. And so, because they were so radical, this was one of the major operational centers for the IWW, the Industrial Workers of the World.
I see.